Greetings, my dear viewer. This is a channel about marital infidelity and about the consequences if one spouse starts to cheat on the other. If you, as well as I do, support true family values and condemn cheating, then subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Let's get started. Nolan sat frozen on the couch, his mind racing to process Victoria's latest revelation. The thought of her embarking on a month-long business trip abroad felt both overwhelming and alien. Victoria elaborated, explaining that her boss had assigned her a critical project requiring her undivided attention. Though Nolan brimmed with pride at her accomplishments, a nagging unease settled in. In their 5 years of marriage, they'd never faced such a lengthy separation. Both in their late 20s, Nolan and Victoria lived in a modest rental at the edge of Willow Creek, a vibrant but quaint city in Oregon. Their home, though simple, was their haven. Both driven by ambition, they worked tirelessly to save for a down payment on their first house. It was part of their shared dream of a stable, prosperous future. Despite their busy schedules, Nolan had always believed their bond was solid and unbreakable. Recently, subtle shifts in Victoria's behavior had caught Nolan's attention. She seemed increasingly absorbed in her career, frequently staying late at the office or volunteering for extra assignments. One evening, Nolan had casually asked, "What's with the sudden grind?" Victoria had laughed, her eyes sparkling as she teased, "Just trying to keep up with you, Mr. Overachiever." Her light-hearted response had made him smile, and he dismissed any lingering doubts. Yet now, watching her pack with meticulous focus, he couldn't shake the sense that there was more to her determination. Victoria spoke enthusiastically about the recognition her hard work was finally receiving and how this project could be a turning point for her career. She hinted at the potential doors it might open. While Nolan swelled with admiration for her drive, he couldn't ignore the persistent feeling of uncertainty. "Should I start practicing my stay-at-home routine for when you're CEO?" he joked. Victoria rolled her eyes, laughing. "Don't get too cozy. By the time I'm back, you'll be boasting about your wife, the Carson Industries' rising star." Her confidence was contagious, and as she embraced him warmly, Nolan allowed himself a momentary sense of comfort. When the day of her departure arrived, a bittersweet mood filled the air. Victoria methodically checked her suitcase one final time before zipping it shut. "Spain," Nolan mused, leaning in the doorway with a faint smile. "A whole month there sounds incredible." Victoria looked over at him, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "It'll be all work, not as glamorous as it sounds. Meetings, deadlines, no time for sightseeing." "Well, if you manage to sneak in a moment, take some photos for me," Nolan replied, masking a twinge of envy. Spain had long been a dream of his, but their finances had always put such trips out of reach. Victoria's expression softened. "I'll bring back something special for you," she promised. At the door, they shared a lingering kiss. "Good luck," Nolan said, squeezing her hand. "Thanks. Love you," she replied, stepping out with her luggage. The first week without her felt strangely quiet. Nolan tried to fill the void in their small home with music and podcasts, but the emptiness was unmistakable. They exchanged occasional texts, with Victoria sharing brief updates about her hectic schedule. Her messages were reassuring, but Nolan missed her presence far more than he had anticipated. By Saturday, he decided it was time for a major grocery run. The fridge had grown noticeably empty. That morning, he drove to a larger supermarket on the other side of town. As he strolled through the aisles, his mind wandered to the lonely evenings at home and the bed that suddenly felt too spacious. Lost in thought, he was startled by a familiar voice. "Nolan! Hey!" Turning, he was surprised to see Heather, an old college friend with an infectious energy. "Heather? Wow, it's been ages," Nolan said, smiling as he approached her. "How have you been?" "Great," Heather replied, shifting her shopping basket. "I just got back from Miami. What about you? Are you back already?" "Back?" Nolan echoed, confused. From where? Heather tilted her head. Miami. I ran into Victoria there a few days ago. She was with someone, a co-worker, I think. She mentioned you were there with friends. Nolan's smile faltered, though he quickly recovered. Oh, right, yeah, been swamped with work since we got back. Heather nodded sympathetically. Don't overdo it. It was great seeing you. Take care, Nolan. She waved and walked off, leaving him rooted to the spot. Miami. Victoria was supposed to be in Spain. The drive home was a blur, Heather's words replaying in his mind. Miami, not Spain, with someone else. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a quick detour for work, or Heather had misunderstood, but a heavy knot of dread settled in his chest. That evening, Nolan couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. He stayed up late, scrolling through social media and rereading Victoria's old messages, searching for anything that might clarify the situation. By Monday, he felt on edge and desperate for answers. After hours of pacing, he resolved to act. Confronting Victoria outright seemed impulsive. He needed proof. Taking a steadying breath, he called her office. Good morning, Carson Industries. How may I assist you? A cheerful voice answered. Lowering his voice, Nolan adopted a casual tone. Hi, I'm an old client of Victoria's trying to reconnect. Could you transfer me to her? After a brief pause, the receptionist responded, Oh, I'm sorry. Victoria is on personal leave. She'll be back in about 3 weeks. Nolan's pulse quickened. I see. Is everything okay? Yes, everything's fine, the receptionist replied warmly. She mentioned her husband had an injury, and she's taking time off to care for him. Very thoughtful of her. Would you like to leave a message? Nolan's grip tightened on the phone. No, thank you, he said abruptly before ending the call. He sank into a chair, staring blankly ahead. 3 weeks of personal leave. Not Spain, not work. Victoria had constructed a complex lie, even involving him in her deception. The realization hit like a blow. Heather's story and the office's account couldn't both be coincidences. Victoria had gone to great lengths to hide something. But what? Nolan's first instinct was to call her immediately and demand the truth, but he hesitated. Victoria was sharp. Without solid evidence, she could easily spin another tale. For now, he needed to plan his next move carefully and uncover the truth before confronting her. Nolan realized that handling the situation required delicacy. He needed unassailable evidence before he could confront her directly. The following afternoon, he left work earlier than usual, his mind made up about his next steps. After scouring the internet, he zeroed in on the most reputable divorce attorneys in Willow Creek. Following some careful consideration, he chose a renowned firm headed by Marshall Wilson. An hour later, Nolan was seated across from Marshall, recounting the strange chain of events that had unfolded over the past week. Marshall listened intently, his sharp gaze fixed on Nolan. Occasionally, he jotted down a quick note, but he refrained from interrupting. Once Nolan finished, Marshall leaned back in his chair, interlocking his fingers thoughtfully. You have a couple of paths to consider, he began, his voice steady and deliberate. If you're certain infidelity is involved, you could wait and gather definitive evidence, Marshall explained. Having concrete proof would strengthen your case in court and might influence how assets are divided. Nolan nodded, though the idea of waiting unsettled him. And the other option? He asked. A slight, knowing smile flickered across Marshall's face, as though he had anticipated the question. The alternative is to act swiftly to safeguard your priorities, Marshall replied. From what you've described, the joint savings account for your future home stands out as crucial. We can transfer those funds into an account solely in your name, ensuring their security. Afterward, we can file for divorce, reducing her leverage when she returns. Nolan weighed the suggestion, the weight of the decision pressing heavily on him. That savings account represented years of hard work and sacrifice. I can't afford to lose that money, Nolan said firmly. I've worked too hard to let it slip away. Marshall nodded in agreement. Then let's devise a plan, he said with confidence. Over the next few days, Nolan meticulously followed Marshall's advice. He pored over their financial records late into the night, transferring funds into a private account with careful precision. Each deliberate move brought a mix of unease and newfound control. By the week's end, the funds were secure, and the divorce papers were ready. All that remained was waiting for Victoria's return. But Nolan wasn't one to sit idle. He resolved to uncover the truth. When Victoria finally came home, the day was sunny and brisk, a sharp contrast to Nolan's stormy thoughts. She exited the cab with a glowing smile, her luggage trailing behind her. Her complexion had a sun-kissed radiance, and she exuded an ease he hadn't seen in months. Walking toward their Willow Creek home, she rehearsed her story. A grueling work trip to Spain that left no time for leisure. But as she approached, she noticed an unfamiliar car parked in the driveway. Maybe Nolan has company, she murmured, brushing off the thought. She reached for her keys, but before she could unlock the door, it swung open. A composed woman in her late 30s stood in the doorway, accompanied by a teenage boy holding a skateboard. The woman's expression was a mix of warmth and quiet resolve. "Hello," she said. "You must be Victoria." Her tone was courteous, yet firm. Victoria blinked, caught off guard. "Yes, that's me. And you are?" she asked, her confusion evident. "What are you doing in my house?" The woman offered a faint smile. "I'm Lisa, and this is my son, Jack. Nolan said you'd be stopping by to collect your things." Victoria's stomach churned as she tightened her grip on her suitcase. "Collect my things?" she echoed, her voice shaky. Lisa gestured toward the hallway. "We moved in a few days ago. It's a lovely house. Nolan made sure everything was ready for us." Victoria's suitcase slipped from her grasp as her thoughts spiraled. "Moved in?" she stammered. "What are you talking about?" Lisa tilted her head, her voice softening. "Nolan ended the lease last week. He thought a clean break would be best." Victoria's pulse quickened. She fumbled for her phone, her hands trembling as she dialed Nolan's number. He answered after 3 rings, his tone calm and composed. "Victoria," he said. "Nolan, what is going on?" she demanded. "There's someone in our house saying you ended the lease. What's happening?" His voice remained even, almost detached. "I decided it was time to move forward. Lisa and her son needed a place, and this house no longer felt like home." "You can't just do that," Victoria cried, her voice breaking. "I already did," Nolan replied. "Your belongings are in the garage, and there's a folder on your car's passenger seat. It contains the divorce papers. You should review them." Before she could respond, the line went silent. Attempts to call him back were met with a blocked number. Her legs threatened to give out as she turned back to Lisa, who regarded her with quiet sympathy. "Your things are packed," Lisa said gently. "I hope you find what you need." Victoria stumbled toward the garage, her vision blurred by tears. Inside, she found neatly arranged boxes. On the passenger seat of her car lay a folder boldly labeled "Divorce Papers." With shaking hands, she opened it, but the words swam before her eyes as her mind raced. The man she believed she could manipulate had completely upended the situation. Desperate, she called her closest friend. "Sarah," she sobbed. "I don't know what to do. Nolan, he's done something drastic." Her voice cracked under the weight of her emotions. "Take a deep breath and come over," Sarah said soothingly. "We'll figure it out together." As Victoria drove through Willow Creek, her tears blurred the streets. At Sarah's apartment, she recounted everything: Lisa's presence, the lease termination, the divorce papers. "Do you think he knows?" Victoria whispered, barely audible. "About Miami?" Sarah asked, her expression grim. Victoria nodded, her face pale. Sarah sighed deeply. "If he does, you need to brace yourself. This could get ugly." Meanwhile, Nolan wasn't idle. That evening, he met old college friends at a local bar. Amid the laughter and nostalgia, his mind remained sharp, focused on the unfolding plan. When one friend, Mike, excused himself, something caught Nolan's attention. Mike's complexion was bronzed, glowing as though he'd spent days in the sun. "You've got quite the tan, Mike," Nolan remarked casually to another friend, Ryan. Ryan chuckled. "Yeah, he just got back from a trip. Didn't share much, but I think he was in Miami." Nolan's interest sharpened. "Miami?" he repeated, his thoughts racing. "Yep," Ryan confirmed, taking a sip of his drink. "Not sure who he was with, but he's been acting a little secretive about it." Nolan's jaw clenched. The pieces were falling into place, and the picture was becoming clear. When Mike returned to the table, Nolan addressed him in a relaxed, conversational tone. "So, Miami, tell me all about it. I've been thinking of going myself." Mike let out a shaky chuckle, clearly uncomfortable. "Oh, nothing special. Just the usual. Beaches, drinks, you know how it is." "Don't be coy," Nolan pressed, feigning sincere curiosity. "You must have taken some pictures. I could use some inspiration for my next trip." Mike hesitated, his hands nervously toying with his phone. "I didn't really take many photos," he muttered, looking anywhere but at Nolan. Ryan smirked, his expression playful but knowing. "Right, Mike, because you're definitely the kind of guy who doesn't document every moment of his vacations." The group's teasing gave Mike little choice. With visible reluctance, he unlocked his phone and pulled up his gallery. Nolan leaned closer, trying to appear casual even as his pulse raced. As Mike flipped through the images, Nolan caught fleeting glimpses of exactly what he'd feared yet expected. There they were, photos of Mike and Victoria. Victoria's radiant smile lit up the frame as she posed on the sand, cocktail in hand. The two of them sat side by side at a beachside bar, their closeness leaving no room for misinterpretation. Though a knot tightened in his stomach, Nolan kept his face unreadable. "Mind if I take a better look?" he asked, gesturing toward the phone. Before Mike could react, Nolan swiftly grabbed it and forwarded several incriminating photos to his own number. "Hey!" Mike protested, lunging to reclaim the device. The rest of the table burst into laughter, assuming it was all a light-hearted prank. Nolan tossed the phone back to Mike, his smile cold and detached. "Appreciate the travel tips," he said evenly. The mood shifted, the tension in Nolan's voice casting a chill over the group. Mike's expression turned ashen as understanding dawned on him. That evening, Nolan reviewed the evidence he had gathered. The photos, along with the attached messages, confirmed his worst suspicions. Victoria hadn't just deceived him, she'd completely shattered his trust. During the following week's court hearings, Nolan presented the undeniable proof. The judge's decision came swiftly, ruling decisively in his favor. Victoria's attempts to twist the proceedings to her advantage unraveled entirely, leaving her empty-handed. The assets she had sought to claim remained firmly under Nolan's control. In the aftermath of the divorce, Victoria's life fell apart. Her social standing took a severe hit, and the friends who once surrounded her disappeared. Her fleeting romance with Mike crumbled under the weight of gossip and mutual regret, fading into insignificance. Meanwhile, Nolan began rebuilding his life. He immersed himself in his work, cultivated stronger connections with his friends, and rediscovered happiness on his own terms. 1 year later, Nolan stood in the kitchen of his new home, bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun. Beside him was Rachel, whose laughter had reignited his sense of hope. Together, they envisioned a future filled with promise, leaving the pain of the past firmly behind. What had once consumed Nolan now existed only as a distant memory, a reminder of the resilience he had gained and the limitless opportunities that awaited him. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you. Greetings, my dear viewer. This is a channel about marital infidelity and about the consequences if one spouse starts to cheat on the other. If you, as well as I do, support true family values and condemn cheating, then subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Let's get started. For years, my house had never been truly quiet. Between the constant hum of work, the kids' energy, and Nora's presence, there was always some movement, some sound filling the space. But this weekend was different. Nora had taken our two boys, Aaron and Jake, to visit her parents in Florida. She had spent weeks planning the trip, meticulously packing their bags, booking flights, and ensuring everything was in order. Meanwhile, I had chosen to stay behind, buried in work obligations, but truthfully, the thought of a peaceful, empty house felt like a rare luxury. That first evening alone, I kept things simple. A quick, effortless dinner, a spot on the couch, and the unusual but welcome embrace of silence. No kids fighting over cartoons, no bedtime protests. Just me, left alone with my thoughts. By 9 o'clock, the quiet was interrupted by a knock at the door. When I opened it, I found Stephen, my neighbor. A retired police officer in his late 50s, he carried himself as if he were still on duty, always aware of his surroundings. "Hey, Floyd," he greeted, stepping onto my porch uninvited. "Saw Nora and the kids heading out earlier. Looks like you're on your own." I nodded. "Yeah, just me for the weekend." He smirked knowingly. "Enjoy the peace while it lasts." Then, lowering his voice, he added, "Listen, just wanted to mention, I installed some security cameras around my property." I frowned. "Security cameras? We live in a safe neighborhood." Stephen shrugged. "That's what they all think, until something happens." He tapped his temple. "A guy a few streets over got hit last week. Break in. You never know." I chuckled, shaking my head. "Appreciate the advice, but I think I'll be fine." "Your call," he said, raising his hands. "Better to be prepared than regret it later." With that, he walked away, leaving me to close the door behind him, dismissing the idea entirely. That night, however, as I lay in bed, his words lingered. What if someone was inside my house right now, and I had no idea? By morning, the thought had settled in my mind like an itch I couldn't scratch. A quick online search later, I found myself ordering a set of security cameras that would stream footage directly to my phone. This wasn't paranoia, I assured myself. It was just being cautious. When the cameras arrived, I spent an afternoon setting them up. One by the front door, another in the backyard, and a third positioned inside near the living room. I even tested them, watching my own movements in real time. With everything in place, I turned off the app and went about my day, feeling a strange sense of relief. What I didn't realize then was that I had just given myself access to something I was never meant to see. The next few days passed uneventfully. I relished the solitude, but by Sunday afternoon, the house was filled with life again. Nora and the boys returned, their voices bouncing off the walls, laughter mixing with playful arguments over couch space. The familiar chaos wrapped itself around me, and for the first time, I realized just how much I had missed it. I barely thought about the cameras after that. I was too busy enjoying the return to normal, but I had no way of knowing that this brief moment of contentment would be the last. A few days later, at work, a stray thought brought the cameras back to mind. On a whim, I opened the app, skimming through the footage. Most of it was unremarkable, until I landed on a clip from Saturday afternoon. The video showed Nora standing at the front door, talking to a man. At first, nothing about it seemed off. But then, the man stepped inside. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark jacket. I watched as Nora smiled, warmly, familiarly. My stomach tightened. Who was he? I rewound the footage, watching the way he moved, confident, comfortable. He wasn't some stranger hesitantly stepping into an unfamiliar home. He knew exactly where to go. My pulse quickened. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe an old friend, a work colleague I'd never met. But something gnawed at me. Something I couldn't shake. I should have called Nora, should have confronted her. But instead I just shut off the app, shoving my phone deep into my pocket, pretending it didn't matter. That night, I lay awake, picturing the man, his ease in my home, the way Nora had welcomed him. I told myself I was overthinking it. But a few days later, I couldn't resist checking again. And there he was. This time, he wasn't just entering. He was in my living room, laughing with Nora. They sat close, speaking in low voices, familiar, intimate. This wasn't some one-time visit. This man knew my wife. He knew my house. I couldn't ignore it any longer. The next day, I installed more cameras, one in the living room, one in the kitchen, and one in our bedroom. I didn't tell Nora. I wasn't ready for her to know what I was searching for. A week passed before I found the courage to check the footage again. Late at night, with the house silent, I scrolled through the recordings, expecting to see the same mundane scenes of daily life. The kids playing, Nora tidying up. Then I saw the bedroom footage. My breath hitched. I clicked on the file. At first, it was just Nora standing near the bed. Then, moments later, he entered. The same man. I gripped my phone as if it might shatter in my hands. Nora didn't flinch, didn't question why he was there. She didn't push him away. She reached for him. A sharp exhale left my lips. I watched as they whispered to each other, their words lost in the silent recording. But I didn't need to hear them. The way they looked at each other said everything. And then, piece by piece, their clothes came off. I shut off my phone, my hands trembling. My whole body felt numb, cold. This wasn't a fleeting mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. I sat there staring at the wall as the weight of it all settled in. How long had this been happening? How many nights had I gone to bed beside her, unaware? My home, my marriage, everything I thought was mine, shattered in a matter of minutes. A scream built in my throat, but I swallowed it down. Because the worst part? The worst part was knowing there was no undoing what I had just seen. I wanted to break something. I wanted to grab her shoulders, shake her until she met my gaze, and demand an answer, any answer, that might dull the ache tearing through my chest. But no words could change this. No explanation would soften the sting. Nothing. Because there was nothing left to say. The next morning, I went through the motions in silence. I got out of bed, made coffee, and watched the kids eat their breakfast. Nora behaved as if everything was normal, oblivious to the fact that I knew. She laughed with Aaron and Jake, pressed kisses to their foreheads, and sent them off to school as if the ground beneath us hadn't shattered overnight. The second the door clicked shut behind them, I spoke. "Sit down." She turned, startled. "What?" "Sit down." Something in my voice must have told her this wasn't a request. Slowly, she lowered herself onto the couch. I pulled my phone from my pocket, opened the video, and handed it to her. She frowned as she took it. But the second she hit play, everything changed. Her lips parted, her breath caught, and the color drained from her face. One hand flew to her mouth, her eyes darting from me to the screen. Silence stretched between us until she finally whispered, "Floyd, please." I crossed my arms and waited. She swallowed hard. It meant nothing. It was a mistake. "I still love you." A bitter laugh escaped me. A mistake? A mistake was forgetting to pick up the dry cleaning. This? I gestured toward the phone. This was a choice, one she had made over and over again. Her eyes shone with unshed tears. I swear it didn't mean anything. "Stop saying that," I snapped, my voice low but sharp. "Because it meant enough for you to bring him here. Into our home. Into our bed." I shook my head, the weight of it all pressing down on me. "You don't understand, do you? The trust is gone." "We can fix this," she pleaded, reaching for my hand. "Please, Floyd, don't throw everything away." I pulled back. Rising to my feet, I looked down at her. "I'm not the one who threw it away, Nora. You did." I turned and walked down the hall. In our bedroom, the one that now felt defiled, I pulled a duffel bag from the closet. A few shirts, a couple of jeans, just enough to get by for a few days. My hands were steady, but inside I felt hollow, as if I were watching a stranger pack his life into a bag. Nora stood in the doorway, her eyes red, her lips trembling. "Where are you going?" I zipped the bag. "I can't stay here." She took a small step forward. "Floyd, please." I brushed past her without looking back. I didn't stop until I was in my car, hands gripping the wheel, the engine humming beneath me. My mind was a mess, but my next stop was clear. My mother's house. When she opened the door, Her face shifted from surprise to concern as she took in my disheveled state, the bag over my shoulder. "Floyd, what's wrong?" I exhaled slowly. "Can I come in?" She stepped aside immediately, and as soon as I sat down, the words spilled out. The cameras, the footage, the betrayal. She listened, her expression moving from shock to sorrow to quiet rage. "Oh, Floyd," she murmured, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "I'm so sorry." I swallowed against the lump in my throat. "I'm done, Mom. I can't go back." She nodded, her grip firm. "Then don't." The next morning I stepped into a lawyer's office. Filing for divorce felt surreal, but I didn't hesitate. I didn't want explanations or apologies. I wanted out. But even as I walked away, something gnawed at me. Who was he? I hired a private investigator, gave him the footage, a description, every scrap of information I had. Days later, he called. I found him. I tightened my grip on the phone. "Who is he?" A pause. Then, "His name is Anthony. He's a teacher at your kid's school." The words hit me like a fist to the gut. A teacher. Not just any man. A man who saw my sons every day, smiled at them in the hallways while sneaking around with their mother. My knuckles went white against the steering wheel as I sat outside my mother's house, struggling to contain the fury rising inside me. But I couldn't. I needed to confront her. One last time. That evening I returned to the house. Aaron and Jake ran to me the moment I walked in, their small arms wrapping around me. I hugged them tightly. "I love you both so much," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the chaos inside me. "But I need to talk to your mom." They hesitated before retreating to their room. Once they were gone, I turned to Nora. "You're cheating on me with our son's teacher?" My voice was quiet, but it cut like a blade. She flinched. "Floyd, I don't want to hear it." I cut her off. "I know who he is. I know everything. And I've already filed for divorce." Her eyes widened. "You what?" "It's over." I let the words settle between us. "You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." For a moment she looked like she wanted to argue, to beg, to justify. But there was nothing left to salvage. This wasn't my home anymore. The next morning, I walked into the school and requested a meeting with the principal. When I showed him the footage, I was clear. No teacher should be having an affair with a student's mother. He looked disturbed and assured me the matter would be handled. By the end of the day, Anthony was fired. The divorce moved fast. We both knew there was nothing to fight for. At first, Nora tried, tears, apologies, empty promises, but none of it mattered. She had shattered something that couldn't be repaired. We split everything evenly. She kept the house. I found a small apartment downtown. The hardest part was custody. I refused to take the boys from her, but I also couldn't see her every day. We settled on shared custody. Weekends with me, weekdays with her. It wasn't perfect, but at least I still had them. The day the divorce was finalized, I walked out of the courthouse feeling lighter. The pain was still there, the betrayal still raw, but I wasn't trapped anymore. I had my freedom, my dignity, and the chance to rebuild. And that was enough. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you.